Good afternoon, and welcome to our first of I hope, a series of webinars on wearable devices for clinicians. All right, so again, thanks for joining. I'm joined today with my colleagues from the Speed School of Engineering, John Neighbor and Doug Jackson, and it's going to become apparent why they're here in just a second. We'll be sort of sharing this presentation over the next hour. And of course, it's going to be recorded for those that want to play it back later or couldn't join today. So why don't we go ahead and I'll just sort of work through our overall context. So this initiative about wearables for clinical research is part of the Louisville Clinical and Translational Research Center, which many of you know was a large grant to enable clinical translational research at the University of Louisville, very specifically clinical studies. And it's a landmark funding opportunity for the university with matching funds from the university. It's in its second year right now. And really the goal of the overall initiative is to really transform our clinical infrastructure to find solutions for prevalent conditions in Kentucky. And it is an all of the university initiative. And I know we've got folks that have signed up for this from all across the university, which is fantastic because it's really going to take interdisciplinary research to do this well. The LCTRC, for those of you that don't know, offers pilot funding to help investigators, get proposals in fighting shape for, follow-on funding from NIH and many other federal agencies. So please stay tuned. I hope you sign up for all communications from the LCTRC so you can take advantage of those opportunities. We also have a presence as part of this program with Owensboro Health. So while a lot of our work every day is focused here in Louisville, this program spans other geographies in the state. I think it's particularly important for our talk today because wearables, remote monitoring technologies, really have some special opportunities outside of urban settings. And so I'm very hopeful that partnership will yield all sorts of interesting projects for us all in the years to come. And then last, we really, this is going to be a conversation about technology, but it is also a conversation about, building skills and competencies in this area. So I hope everybody from your teams, your collaborators, feels welcome into these kinds of conversations because it really does take everybody to do this work well. So a subset of the LCTRC is an initiative called the Clinical Research Innovation Initiative. And I have the great pleasure of getting that work started here at the LCTRC. And then recently recruited John and Doug because it really is going to take a village in this case to do this kind of work. The reason that this component was put into the original grant was because we wanted to recognize that wearable technologies were playing an increasingly large role in clinical research. And I'm sure you all would have joined this call if you didn't already know that, but it's a fast-moving landscape, and the way that we approach it for answering difficult research challenges, I think it's important. And really, the whole point of this kind of an educational opportunity is really to get on the same page, try to use some of the same language, and get to know the other folks that can be helpful in this journey. I'm certainly no expert. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to be a technical resource to help connect people who may be stuck in different stages of adoption to get them unstuck so that they can keep pursuing this. And so here to help. And I know that's also true for John and Doug. So that relationship with John and Doug, they run the Louisville UofL's Custom Wireless Electronics Laboratory at the Speed School. I've known these folks for a couple of years now, and they really do just amazing work. It's going to become very clear to you why they're part of this initiative, and I do hope that you'll get to know them as well as I do. So we're working on gaps in chronic conditions, and I just want to say it's always helpful in any kind of research project to be clear about what you're doing. And so I view these technologies as important, really, to help us learn new things about health conditions. And so we're not doing technology for technology's sake. We want everybody to be able to have a long and prosperous research career. So these are tools of discovery. These are tools to provide new insights. And I hope we all sort of share that spirit. I really do appreciate you all making the time to join this. Like I said, this will be one of, I think, quite a few in a series to really cover this territory well. I appreciate you registering. You'll be getting other kinds of communications derivative from this, and that you should always feel free to reach out to me and my colleagues here on this at any time with questions. Sort of the quick and dirty orientation, it's really important when you're talking about wearable technology, which really sort of maybe describes the form factor more than the kind of the nature of the technology. There are, at least one bright line to draw between things that you can get off the shelf that many of us are very familiar with, the smart watches and Whoops and Aura rings and all those kinds of things, and versus purpose-built medical devices. And we're really going to try to sort of cover both of those. I think there's a place for each of those that's appropriate. And there are certain considerations that we all need to keep in mind that are different among those two platform types. So in the off-the-shelf category, it's important to know, these devices weren't put on the market to be medical devices. And it can be a little confusing and certainly misleading if, somebody tells you that they have their Aura ring and it's good at measuring sleep. It's got some evidence that it can measure some aspects of sleep, but it's not recognized as a gold standard measure of sleep. And so you'd be hard pressed to do original sleep research with an off-the-shelf device like that. But that's not to say there's not a role for a device like that. It's just its role isn't to be the definitive platform for what you're measuring. And so a lot of these off-the-shelf technologies have really demonstrated very interesting new insights that I think we can probably all understand as indicators of something, but not necessarily the definitive measure of something. And so, this is very important because by the time you get to very rigorous clinical applications, there are hard questions that really need to be addressed about the quality and the fidelity of the clinical information that these devices produce. And they didn't go through a regulatory pathway to provide that type of information. They went through a wellness, fitness pathway, which is in some senses a lighter standard. Again, it's not to say that it's not useful and it can provide information that's helpful, but we just need to keep clear in our heads if we need the definitive measure, it is unlikely to come from an off-the-shelf device. The second thing I would say when people are considering these devices is because we all want to help you pursue a long and fruitful funded career of research, the next folks that you'll meet will be reviewers. And as you propose to use technologies that lack any sort of validation or significant evidence base, that of course will be, scored against you. And I've seen many situations like that. So I hope that you won't consider it, like I'd like to buy the neatest thing that I've read about lately in Wired magazine or whatever. I really want you to, take a deep breath and do the work to figure out how much validation the particular device that you're looking at has. And their devices have been on the market. These off-the-shelf devices, like Fitbits, been around for so very long. There are thousands of studies, right, that will provide some kind of an evidence base of how reliable or consistent the kind of information they produce are. But of course, there are always new things coming out, and a lot of times those things come out with only manufacturer's validation, and so it's just sort of a researcher beware moment. Not to say you can't use devices like that, but you really need to go in with your eyes open that It will always be less controversial for the work that you're doing if somebody else has done some of the validation work that you're building off of. Then, and then of course, it's important to think about how that device, when you're selecting it, really fits into the research population that you're working with. And there are a number of factors for off-the-shelf technologies that really must be taken very seriously. They include what is always the case, that there are some terms of service around data that the manufacturer has. There's access to data challenges sometimes that these manufacturers have. Some of them have APIs, some of them don't. Some of them, share, how their software works, if they're calculating heart rate variability or something like that, and sometimes they don't. So, you are at the mercy of whatever their data frameworks are. And then, of course, we know that some of these technologies have, closed systems, so the Apple products, they're very nice and elegant and they work, but they operate in a closed arena. So if you have an Apple Watch, you need to have an iPhone and you need to have an Apple account. And it's not as simple as buying the device, you're buying the whole system. And we have to think about, whether that creates barriers for use and access. So that gets you to the patient population. Is this going to be a device that many people will be able to use and use fully? And then, just the basics, and these more engineering things for my colleagues, battery life and, how it will fit into your study, so we need people to be adherent to protocols. And it's a very common scenario with wearable devices that if there's anything complicated about the device's use, that it needs to be charged every 8 hours or something. These are always things that can, translate into abandonment of the clinical study or of that aspect of the study. And of course, you'd want to know about that before you started. And then I put up here, just as a reference, the Digital Medicine Society, DIME, has some great resources that I encourage everybody to take a look at if you're going down this journey. It sort of, can walk you through, kind of the basic logic tree of, what to consider when, just from the very basics of, do I know how this sensor works? Yes.
Ted, sorry to interrupt. I think that I might have lost track of where you are in the presentation.
I'm at the V3 evaluation of digital clinical measures, bluish looking.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry. Auctioneer style. I'm trying to make room for my engineering colleagues. So I encourage you to take a look at the dimesociety.org website. It's a great framework. And then I will wrap up my section with, kind of just a reminder that where your wearable fits into, kind of a readiness framework. So is this a kind of a early kind of, I'm looking for some kind of a signal, some kind of a pattern, or is this, I'm really looking for, the thing that reliably measures something. And so, this, the sort of the weight of the evidence, the robustness of the platform itself, it's important to keep in mind where you are with thinking about using that device. And so I'm happy to, in future iterations, sort of go through some examples of, kind of where these different devices can sort out on this continuum. But I want to leave a little room for my colleagues here. So I'll turn it over to you, John. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ted. And Doug and I want to finish up too with plenty of time before our 3 o'clock deadline, so you all can ask questions to us. So I'm the director of the UofL Custom Wireless and Electronics Lab. A little background about myself. I worked in industry for 10 years as an integrated circuit designer before coming to the University of Louisville in '95. So I've spent the last 30 years here at UofL, a lot of it working with Doug, developing custom solutions. Really, a lot of them focused on the medical side of things. So we've worked with a lot of researchers from the med school, and a lot of our earlier work, first 10 years worth, were really focused on making things extremely small to go into the body. And I'll give you a couple examples of those. But our main focus today is really talking about the transition we made roughly last 10 years to using more the wearable technology and developing custom type wearables, things that you can buy off the shelf, parts you can buy off the shelf, but with some customization. So what I'm going to cover will be the implanted devices, some of the wearable stuff, and then I'm going to hand off to Doug, and he's going to talk about remote medicine and analytic devices. So we started, Chrissy, can you go ahead and advance? So this, one more, please. So we'll start with the ultra small here. So one of our earlier projects was a electronic sensing system consisting of a pressure sensor and an RFID custom integrated circuit that goes into the eye. So the team members on this research are ophthalmologists from Yale and NYU, and our own Rich Eiferman from UofL. So our goal was to come up with something that could fit into the anterior chamber, which is a pretty small space, which included what you see on the right-hand side of the slide. So you can see the coil, which was used to generate power. We have to use RFID because there's no room for batteries. Even small coin cells aren't going to fit in the eye. And then we have our ASIC, which is just a custom circuit, and then the sensor that we developed in our $30 million Class 100 clean room here in Shoemaker Research. The size, just put it in perspective, you see the penny, but the measurement of the ASIC is about 500 microns on a side. So 100 microns is roughly the diameter of a human hair. So that chip is like 5 human hairs on the side. And having that technology is the only way you can develop things like this. So the intent was to put the sensor in people with glaucoma so they could monitor in real time and continuously what their IOP is, because it varies just like your blood sugar levels vary. But the only way you can get a measurement is you go into the ophthalmologist and they use a tonometer, which is a probe that pushes against the eye. And of course, you can't really do that yourself. So that's one of the examples. The next one, can you go forward? Thanks. Is similar technology, but now a different application. Instead of going into the eye, we're going into the spine. And our team members were Dr. Andy Puno from the Leatherman Spine Center. He's recently retired. We put a custom sensor on the spinal rods. There's about 500,000 of these procedures done each year. And again, we have a problem with limited space. We had more than we have in the eye, but this could be you can't put batteries in the body either if a patient's going to require this to work for their lifetime. So that really drove, again, the RFID technology. So the end result was that overall we got an NSF grant from this. We got $12 million in venture capital funding. And then during COVID, we could not raise the rest of the funds to get through clinical trials. And that's been a real valley of death for some of these projects, including the earlier work with the glaucoma project. The funding is just extremely large, and you can't really get that from NIH. So we're trying to raise $10 million now for the eye project, and this one I think would have required another $5 or $6 million to get through clinical trials. So that's a big challenge that Doug and I basically found out the hard way, that it's difficult to get a product in the market if you don't have the funding for the implantable stuff. So let's move to the next slide. And this was a kind of a game changer for us with getting FDA approval. We're not really looking at putting things inside the body anymore. We're more focused on having something outside the body that it's already available, that we can start collecting data and using for our research. So next slide, Chrissy. So this table shows you the trade-off between two very popular technologies to measure SpO2. On the left side, or the middle column, is the gold standard. That's the fingertip SpO2 measurement. So everybody's familiar with that. When you go into your annual physical with your GP, they'll make that measurement and put a clip on your finger, and you basically have an LED that shines light through your finger, and then a photosensor on the bottom that detects the signal. That works great, and it's FDA approved, but the problem is it doesn't work if you try to put on a smartwatch. The wrist is too thick and the signal gets attenuated. So some really smart engineers have, within the last relatively 5 years, this is pretty new technology, figured out you can look at the reflectivity of the signal. So these new smart watches, they basically bounce light off and look at the reflected signal, and they can get good information. Now, the problem is that the quality of information isn't as good as the fingertip SpO2. And we found this out in our lab when we were experimenting with a Apple Watch and our own customized watch that we kind of built ourselves, and then a watch from the only FDA approved watch that we know of for SpO2, and that's from a company called Oxytone. But one of the problems is the wrist has to be really stable. If you're moving it all around, the artifacts are terrible, and the measurement is very poor. So these systems typically have an accelerometer in them, so it'll only get a measurement when your wrist is stationary. The Oxytone, they came up with some really cool differences from these other watches that allow them to make a measurement, and Doug's gonna talk about that in more detail. So let's go to the next one. So here's some examples to look at. So the watches that we're familiar with is really one watch. That's why I've highlighted yellow is the Apple Watch. We looked at that. As I was saying, for SpO2 measurements, we've looked at the Oura Ring for SpO2 as well as heart rate and for a variety of different projects. And you can see in the middle column, we talk about data access, and that is so important. And Ted alluded to that earlier. He mentioned the API, the application programming interface. Not all devices come with that. If your device that you want to use doesn't have its own API to allow you to access the data, then you might not get what you want out of the project. And an example is the Whoop watch. That's very highly controlled, what is available for you on the data side. And some of these systems like the Fitbit give you access over a web API, not one that's built into the device. The Oura Ring is the device that we've probably spent the most time on recently on a couple different projects, and the ring goes for about $200 to $400. All these watches will say they can do all kinds of stuff, and as Ted pointed out, that I think Ted actually has one as well. Talks about sleep, and they can do all these things, but again, it's hit or miss sometimes, and it's all about the accuracy. But what we've noticed is the Apple Watch, the Oura Ring, as well as the Oxytone watch, and then our custom watch that we made are fantastic on measuring heart rate. It seems like that's the one measurement that is very accurate and very consistent. The other measurements not as much so. So another thing Ted mentioned was battery life. So we get about a week of battery off the Oura Ring, which is pretty amazing considering they put this lithium ion flexible battery inside that round ring, which is much more than these other smartwatches, which you're lucky to get a day's charge without having to recharge. But if you look at the inside back of the ring there, you can see three kind of dark squares. Those are the photosensors. And then the other two squares that have like a little gold reflectance to them, those are the LEDs. So there's typically two different LEDs at different wavelengths to measure SpO2, and then there's usually a green LED for the heart rate measurements. So these things are pretty complicated, and they're looking at all these LEDs firing at the same time, looking at various reflected signals, and then processing the data and and coming up with a way for you to access it. So let's go to the next one, Chrissy. So the last table I've got here lists some of the watches that are more focused on the research clinical side, if you will. The previous slide, are very commercial, and everybody pretty much knows about those. These are maybe a little bit more unique, and they're not as popular because they're more expensive. The ones in yellow, or two of them in yellow, Empatica and Oxytone, we have experience. Empatica, a colleague in the ECE department has used that for the work she was doing on autism. And the reason that she really was drawn to using that was the ability to get the data. And you know, anytime in research, we always want to be able to get all the data we can. The one at the bottom I have there, Oxytone. So that's the one from an Israeli company that we are using with a project in a nursing home where we've developed a smart brief monitoring system. And this watch is like what I said before, is the only FDA approved watch. And then you might say, okay, how is it different? And we were kind of incredulous as what the differences are, but we saw firsthand what the main difference is. And the main difference is it measures SpO2 accurately below 90%. So the way we tested it out, I asked Doug to hold his breath for 5 minutes, but he couldn't do it. So we could never get his SpO2 down less than 90. But we did find patients in our clinical trials going up in Ohio at nursing homes whose SpO2 readings were in the 80s. And the Oxytone watch was very accurate and be able to determine that, as well as the other custom watch that we were looking at from a company called Maxim. But the Oxytone watch would measure something in the low 80 percentile, and then the Apple Watch on the same person would say the SpO2 is 95%. Wasn't even close. So when you dig into what Oxytone does, though, you can see their patents, and it's a completely different design. They bring the LEDs in on the side, and they have some extra covers to keep ambient light out. So they put a lot of engineering into coming up with a better device for measuring low SpO2. If you don't need low SpO2, then there's no reason to go the FDA approval route. Next one, Chrissy. I think that might be it for me. So custom wearables, I'm going to hand it off to Doug, and Doug's going to get more into the nuts and bolts on showing you some of the stuff that we've done and what we're capable of doing, if it can help you all. Go ahead, Doug.
All right. So we've done some work with wearables and analytical devices and research support, product development, and that sort of thing. So I'll touch a little bit on the wearables sort of for the watches at first. Next slide. So as Dr. Neighbors said, we spent quite a bit of time looking at two systems. One was a development kit from Analog Devices, and the other was a product, this Oxytone watch. Why we were interested in the development kit is it gives you the most access to the data in the watch. We get sample by sample. We can control everything. Brightness of the LEDs, pulsing rates of the LEDs, everything. Then with the Oxytone watch, it's an example of an FDA approved device. So for reflective devices, it's probably the gold standard right now in our opinion. Now it just still doesn't really compare, I think, to transmissive devices, high quality finger device, but for a wrist wearable, it's very good. Now it does have a little bit of a disadvantage in terms of comfort, but we at the time were primarily looking for a patient group in nursing homes. So you can see from this photo here on this Maxim kit, there's a little green circuit board in the bottom, and that's really the heart of this thing. You go to the next slide, please. So in that little circuit board, there's the sensor, which is the photodiodes, the LEDs. There's the analog front end, which is amplifiers, filtering, and a digitizer. And then there's an algorithm to process the digital data, and that's proprietary from Maxim, and that's usually a closely guarded piece of intellectual property by these companies. So that really sort of forms the sensor module for that. That's really the only part that we were after. So we ended up sort of breaking that device out and putting external control on that little sensor module. So we had full access to control everything we want sort of on our own terms. And then we did sort of a comparison against those lab measurements that we made with that device you see there with my arm there. We did lab measurements of that versus the oxytone device. So our findings for this would be, like most reflective devices, the Maxim product sensor has the typical problems. It's sensitive to skin pigmentation. It has poor accuracy at low SpO2 levels, and it certainly has maybe a little bit more sensitivity to reflective or ambient light. Whereas the oxytone, again, produced more stable readings than we've seen with any other device, although that does come a little bit of a cost for comfort. Now, in terms of maybe general population where you don't care as much about low SpO2, maybe those considerations are not quite as important. So let's go on to the next slide. So this is getting away from PPG and sort of going towards product. This is an industry-sponsored device, and we needed to make a contraction monitor for detecting false labor. And so this is worn during late pregnancy, and we had 3 really important criteria. It had to be self-contained, it was very simple to use, and low cost. So we have no problem generally making things self-contained and simple to use. That's usually pretty straightforward. Low cost sometimes is a little bit of a challenge. We looked at some other tokodynamometers, and they used expensive force sensors. So what we came up with was a way to make a little cantilevered section on a circuit board and put a strain gauge on that. And these circuit board materials are actually quite well engineered. So with a little bit of calibration, we were able to produce a very low cost device that would be, a consumer grade device in that market. So that device was produced and sent out to a patient pilot study, and I think we're integrating that into some other products as well. Next slide. One of our longer term projects has been related to nursing home care, and this is incontinence care, and that really is at the heart of a lot of problems in a nursing home. So it's related. Poor management of incontinence is related to UTIs, skin breakdown, other conditions, dehydration, and if incontinence is not being managed, that's usually an indicator that there's probably some other poor levels of care being provided. So building this device gives us insight about incontinence and the care that's being delivered to the patient. So we're able to hopefully head off some of the complications that are really unnecessary for the nursing home. So our system is a disposable brief that has these ink electrode strips printed on them, and that's printed at very low cost. And it almost makes the brief cost neutral, because by having this kind of brief, you can generally run a lower cost brief because you can use less filler, because you can change the brief out more promptly. So you don't have to rely on as much absorbent material as you would with a thicker brief. So we have the brief issue, the solution for that. We have this reusable clip-on module that includes the resistance measurement circuit, of course, for voiding. And then it also includes a position sensor, so we can tell if someone's been in a position for a long period of time, which is a major risk factor for skin breakdown. We can also look at temperature. The back of the module has temperature sensors in it, and that can measure skin temperature. So we can look and actually can sense fever. Now, it's not the same as a core measurement, but we can see trends. And we have seen that data actually provide early warning. So, and then the last sort of, I guess, component of that system is the networked data, and then the alerting system and the management system of the caregivers. So all this data comes up to the cloud, it's all processed, alerts are given to the staff, the performance of how long it takes the staff to change the brief, all that's logged. And so that can provide you with some good insight about like how your care is being scheduled or your resources are being managed, because obviously some patients require a lot more attention from a caregiver. And that's right now that's in I think at least five nursing homes right now. So that product's actually rolling out pretty well. And next slide, please. So here are three sort of random products. The first is this was a research project. This was a sensor to detect when a baby is drinking from a bottle, and then that can be used to trigger audio tracks to help reinforce the baby's response to using the bottle. So this is a problem for some babies, particularly ones that have disabilities. They have a really hard time transitioning to a bottle, and to the point where they can get malnutrition from that lack of ability. So this was researched to see if once a baby would start drinking from a bottle and then they would hear the mother's voice singing, things like that, whether that would help the baby transition better to the bottle. Another is again, sort of in the realm of the low-cost pregnancy devices, is a low-cost ultrasonic heart rate monitor with a Bluetooth link, so that data can be uploaded to others, and others can basically listen to that heartbeat sound. And then the bottom one here is the call button. This is a proof of concept. So we were told that there was an issue with hospital readmittance fees that occur when patients go home from the hospital and they don't really follow up through the proper channels well, and then they end up getting readmitted to the hospital for the same set of problems in a very short amount of time, and apparently there's some fees associated with that, and they would like to have had a way that a patient can get a good response without going through call centers and all these other things. So we essentially made a cell phone based call button, and this doesn't really use a cell phone, but uses the cellular network. And if a patient presses that button, they see that the call was sent, and then when the call center gets that message, they see that the call was received, and then it's up to the nursing organization to call the patient back and find out what the problem is and send someone out to look at them, or recommend a trip to the hospital or doctor. Next slide, please. Next one. So analytical devices. So there's probably three areas, potential areas for these analytical devices. One is just miniaturization. The other is research support, and I think new product design is probably another one. This is one of our older projects. So we miniaturized capillary electrophoresis with electrochemical detection. So normally that was done with long fused silica capillaries, big high voltage power supplies and all that. And we were one of the first to shrink all that down to relatively small size, and also shrink the actual analytical device, the lab on a chip slide that you see there. We got that all combined and made many publications on that, and was awarded patents for that. And it was very successful. So we never turned it into a product because it was just a sponsored research project, but that was successful for us. Next slide. These are more research based ones, but the first one we hope that this will come is laying the groundwork for our product, and this is to detect whether blue light exposure can be effective in killing bacteria. So we think we might be able to use this as a means or a substitute for antibiotics in the ear. So we've started showing efficacy of the blue light with different samples of bacteria at different amplitudes and different pulsing parameters. So this is ongoing. We've got an application in the works, and eventually we're going to need a human trial for this. And the last one there is we've done quite a bit of work for electrode designs and neurostimulation. So we did a lot of preliminary work on electrode arrays and charge balance for complex stimulation patterns. So this work, we're not doing anything active with this now, and actually our patents that we were awarded for that have been sold by UofL. So, but that's an area of research support that we've done. Next slide, please. And here's one that's a product. This is sponsored from a company. So the concept is to develop a glucometer style device that also measures potassium and sodium. This is obviously good for monitoring kidney function. So we've already built the glucometer portion of it there that you see, and the University of Kentucky is developing our electrode or our test strips for potassium and sodium. So we're hopefully going to get those in a few months, and then we'll combine those. So we'll have all three on this device. And then once we get this buttoned up a little bit, we've applied for another grant, and we will eventually need a trial for this device as well. Next slide, please. Next. And this is, I guess, although the other devices, you could probably consider them remote medicine, but this one was primarily intended for that. Again, this is privately funded work. And the concept here is that after knee surgery, you have very limited time to get a full range of motion, and those exercises are painful, but they have to be done. If you wait and you're slow to do that, you could have a permanent disability in terms of range of motion. So this is the device that you use. You measure your exercise performance every day, and this device uploads data to the doctor. And if the doctor doesn't like what they're seeing in terms of your range, or if you're not following through, then you're called in to the physical therapist. So this device was, I think it had a unit of about 500 unit production. So, and it was used, I think, in a trial or two. So it's been a while since I've followed up to see where that's at. Next slide, please.
So Doug, let me take this one. I just want to make sure we got plenty of time to finish. I'll just do a summary of the summary. So bottom line is, we're here to help you all using wearables in your research, and you have our contact information. If we can be of any assistance, let us know. We'd be glad to work with you. Just about everything we do, we team up with a researcher, either in industry or down to med school. So Ted, you've got the three last slides.
Got the last couple slides,
and then we can throw out the questions.
Perfect. And John, I think there's already a question I flagged you in the chat to answer, so you can work on that. Christy, next slide, please. So, this was an initial teaser. While we were developing this, Dr. Klein, who, is a key figure in the LCTRC, is wise enough to say, hey, we also have some other issues that aren't maybe research-specific issues. The kinds of questions that we're probing. Those, include data privacy and security. There's some questions in the chat about that. So we're teaming up. We're building a bigger village. So Stacy McCutcheon from the Privacy Office, Shannon Pipes from the University Council, to really make sure that we're thinking about all of these other things. As you wouldn't be surprised, there are many legal frameworks that apply to these kinds of data, at sort of all levels of government. And this is why we have these folks on our team to help you navigate those aspects of these projects. Next slide, please. There's related sort of, I think it was IT issues, but it's a blurry landscape between IT, privacy, and security, about, where data can be stored and how data can be stored. The university has some very specific guidelines and requirements about that. Some of that is here. But the reason I put this up is because I'll be asking Stacy if she'd be willing to host a follow-up webinar, to really go through some of this stuff in detail, because I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. And then in the next slide, another extremely important stakeholder is our Institutional Review Board. And Christy Leduc has joined forces here with us because the IRB has had a lot of experience with folks coming to them with protocols that involve these devices that maybe not have thought through all of the issues that are research, human subjects, ethics, concerns, safety, privacy, and it is a different lens that we all have to look through when we're doing clinical studies. And so I think what you're going to find is it's going to take a number of resources to help make sure that you're thinking about everything that's relevant here. So I'll hope that Christy will join for a future session where we just focus on the kinds of things the IRB has seen, and maybe help you get through that process more efficiently in the future. So let's go ahead and open up to any questions. I'm not really sure, Christy, I'm going to defer to you on the best way to navigate chats and questions.
So I think if we go in order, we have the first question, which was regarding the skin pigmentation, and if it's more or less accurate on darker skin tones for the Maxim custom wearable device.
So I just answered that one too in the chat, but
okay.
I mean, it's I think it's the opposite actually. I think there's more attenuation because of the darker the skin tones. But we just noticed things in our lab amongst the 4 researchers where things varied a lot, and we didn't really understand why one person was getting consistent measurements versus someone else. So Doug, do you remember, was there any research that you recall based upon
I think
that?
in general, the consensus is it's more difficult for darker skin tones. The finger devices generally work better, and there are more wavelengths being used all the time. And I think some of those may help a little bit, but that still remains a problematic area. And I think a lot of times people, I guess in terms of a medical device, people always default back to the finger device anyway. So these wrist wearables are sort of a secondary type of measurement. So yes, that's a problem, and more work probably needs to be done in that area.
And the other thing on that too is what I was mentioned earlier is that it depends on the measurement too. The SpO2 measurement on these devices is a lot more challenging than the heart rate measurement. The heart rate measurement seems like it's rock solid across the board pretty much.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to be able to acquire heart rate in less than 10 seconds. And that's a pretty good measurement. And that's with a reflective measurement. And then for SpO2, not uncommon to need 30 or even 60 seconds of baseline measurement for some of these algorithms to go in and be able to extract SpO2. So depending on your application, that could be a big problem. For us, since we were in a nursing home, we had the ideal case. We had patients that weren't moving much. But if you're looking for a sports device, something like that, no, you're going to have to stop and be still in order to have this device actually measure reasonably well. I'm sure it'll be improved over time because this is sort of an emerging technology, the reflective portion of it. but it still remains a problem. And also, complicate things a little more, if you're using a device and you want to have long battery life, anytime you turn that sensor on, you've got LEDs that are consuming the majority of the power, and that's a lot of your energy being lost for that measurement. So it's really difficult to make continuous SpO2 measurements. That's a lot. That's more energy than most of these wearables have. They can do spot measurements at best, and then if you start a measurement and after 30 seconds you mess it up by having some motion or something like that, well, then it's a lost cause. Maybe you get the heart rate, and that's about it.
Okay, thank you. The next question was from Dr. Dryden about environmental sampling from the subject surrounding, if that's a possibility.
So I'll take a shot at that. So environmental sensors, it's a sort of a different category of measurement activity. It's important for a lot of research questions. A lot of the same basic advice applies here. I mean, the cost has gone down dramatically in many kinds of environmental sensing, you know, as the hardware has become less expensive. Again, the gold standards in most environmental sensing are much better than low-cost devices, and usually an order of magnitude or more better. And so, you know, I like to think of it. I've done a lot of work with low-cost air monitors. You know, it's indicative data, right? I made that sort of snide comment about Oura rings. I'm not to say that it can't tell you anything about sleep. It's just, it's not the definitive data on sleep, but, you know, it might be giving you some kind of an indicator of something that's worth looking at or understanding more deeply. The same can be said of environmental sensing, that you know, low-cost devices that are, you know, much more accessible, easier to get your hands on, easier to incorporate in a study, you know, will invariably bring the problem of, you know, I'm maybe just getting an indicator of whether there's more air pollution or unhealthy amounts of noise, but we shouldn't confuse that with having the definitive data. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and then just quickly, I am going to launch a poll. It's 3 quick questions, if the people on the call would not mind answering that really quickly. And then while I do that, I believe Dr. Wong has a question. His hand was raised.
Oh, he's muted. Can't
I'm
unmute the mic.
trying to.
All right.
There we go.
Okay.
Well, there you go. I think I got it. You know, I think my camera's still muted, but it, you know, that's okay. So Ted, John, and Doug, excellent presentation. I mean, this is certainly new and exciting. And I think that I definitely want to set up a meeting with the 3 of you to talk about a collaboration with our healthcare system, UofL Health. We have a lot of physicians who really want to do research, but you know, as a physician, we don't know how to make things. You know, we have a clinical idea, but we need to reach out to you all to see how to make things. So the other thing is you have device already, you want to do clinical studies, and we will be able to help with that. So we will be able to identify the physician to help. So I'll reach out to you all and set up a meeting to talk about how we can bring the physician to you and vice versa.
Thank
Look
you so
forward
much.
to it. That's awesome.
It's a great idea.
Thank you.
It's right, 3 o'clock, Ted. It's
Yeah, we
perfect
get there.
time.
All questions are answered. I really appreciate everybody joining today. Thank you. It's our inaugural thing. We're going to work the bugs out. It's a pleasure to be here with such a great community here at the university. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.